It's time to get your music radio ready with the Audio Skills Podcast. It doesn't matter what type of music you're creating or what gear you use. It's all about the technique. Get ready to turn your home studio into a place where your music goes platinum. Now give it up for your host, Scott Hawksworth.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Scott here, bringing you another episode of the Audio Skills Podcast. This week, we've got a great show for you where I'm going to be talking about music making in general and diving a little bit into electronic music production with the founder of EDMProd.com, Sam Matla. But before getting into all of that, I wanted to start off with your audio tip of the week. My tip this week is pretty simple. Listen to music that you love critically. Listening to music is fun and it's great for just developing your taste and your ear. But if you want to improve at producing and mixing specifically, listening to the same music critically can be a huge benefit. We all have our favorite songs, so the next time yours comes on, try listening to it in a different way. Focus on the low end. How does it sound? What do you like about it? What do you dislike about it? Try to dial in on the effects, the dynamics, the tone of the instruments, the panning, and how things all fit together. If you want to get better at anything, it helps to observe the best. Music is no different. So while it may not be quite as fun as just bumping a great song that you love, it can help you discover not only what you like and what you don't like when it comes to mixing and production, but also what makes awesome recordings and mixes sound so great. That is your audio tip of the week. So now I am thrilled to introduce our guest for this week, who's going to be talking a little bit about music making and electronic music production with us. His name is Sam Matla, and he is the founder of EDMProd.com and host of the EDM Prodcast, as well as the author of The Producer's Guide to Workflow and Creativity. So he knows a lot when it comes to electronic music production. Sam, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, Scott. Thanks for having me on. It's great to be here.
Right on. How's New Zealand these days?
You know what? It is raining outside at the moment. It's been raining for a good 2-3 hours now, but it's good, man. It's a great country to live in. I love it.
That's awesome. You know, visiting New Zealand is definitely a bucket list item for me, and no, not just because I'm a fan of Lord of the Rings. But no, seriously, I have a few buddies who went on like a backpacking trip there a number of years ago, and just the pictures they got were just amazing, and it seems like such a wonderful country for sure.
Yeah, it's beautiful, man.
So to start us off, can you just tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you have going on over at edmprod.com?
Yeah, for sure. So as you mentioned, my name is Sam Matla, and 50% of people make the mistake and they say Sam Malta, or they write Sam Malta, but it's not. The T goes before the L. I got into electronic music production and online business around the same time, age 14, and I would come home from school, and instead of doing homework, this is high school, instead of doing homework, I would just make music. I would just work on whatever like blog or business project I was working on at the time. I'd just spend time on that.
I love it.
And so I tried running a few blogs on various topics, skateboarding, personal productivity. They all failed. And then in June 2013, I kind of sat down and I was like, what am I going to do? You know, I'm 18. Am I going to go to college? I have no idea. But
right.
I've been making music for 4 years. I tried a few businesses. And so I just decided that I would commit full time to making music. And on the side, I would run a blog, EDM Prod. And within about 2 weeks, it switched around, like doing the blog full time and making music on the side a few hours a day. And initially, it was just a blog and YouTube channel. Back then, nowadays, it's one of the most popular websites for electronic music producers. We have over 200 articles, 60 plus podcast episodes, a range of products. And yeah, like I could never have predicted that it would get to this point back then.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And so these days you have your products, you just have blog posts, and don't you have a number of other, producers and things like that write content for you and help you with courses and things, right?
Yeah, for sure. I've got one other team member at the moment. His name is Connor, and we've had a few other people who help out with content and products and stuff like that. And that's kind of the goal over the next couple of years, to get more people involved. Because there are a ton of talented artists, producers out there who could benefit from teaching or creating content or
absolutely
something like that. So that's something I really care about.
Right on. So for today's show, I actually want to talk a bit about electronic music production and making music in general. And, two questions off the top. What is electronic music production, and what music genres most typically exemplify electronic music production?
Great questions. I would say it's pretty simple to define. I define it as making music on a laptop. And I have to answer this question a lot because any kind of event, social event, whatever, people ask, what do you do? And I have to explain what electronic music production is.
Right.
Making music on a laptop or computer. That's what 90% of electronic music producers are doing. They're in their bedrooms. They've got a laptop, they've got headphones, they're writing songs with software. So it's music that's made through mostly electronic means. Now, obviously, you can record live instruments and so on, and people do that. But for the most part, it's synthesizers, digital audio effects, and that kind of stuff. As for genres, it's it's a bit of a controversial question. I would say that the genres that exemplify electronic music production: house music, trance, dubstep, drum and bass. These would be the key ones, I would say. But if you think about the top 40 music that's coming out nowadays, most of that is electronic music. Most of it is synthesized and so forth.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's something that I think, it started definitely over in Europe, I know. And back in the day, that's just, it hadn't quite penetrated into the pop charts in the way that it is today. And, it makes sense too that a lot of people today want to make that kind of music because, that's what they're hearing on the radio or that really moves them, or they go to the club or whatever. And it's so amazing too, the technology that allows you to make this music on your laptop. It's really revolutionized music making. So my next question is, would you say that basically anyone, assuming that they have some kind of ear for music, could make electronic music?
Yeah, absolutely. And I am of the camp that believes very few people are born tone deaf. And if you aren't born tone deaf, you can learn an instrument, you can learn to make music. Because there's this myth out there that is, I'm not a musical person.
Yeah.
That is a myth. There's no scientific basis for it, as far as I know and what I've looked at. So I would say yes, anyone, if they want to, assuming they're not tone deaf or deaf, can make electronic music. All you really need to get started is the software. I use Ableton Live, a pair of headphones, decent headphones, and a computer. And any modern computer will be powerful enough to run this software. So the cost of entry is low.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if you were someone who wanted to start doing vocals or something, microphone technology keeps getting better and better, and there are so many options out there where you can get a pretty darn solid mic right off the bat that could get you some good vocals. It's not going to get you like the, type of vocal that would be an $18,000 microphone or something crazy, but it'll sound good. And yeah, so the barrier to entry is pretty low. So kind of shifting gears, you talk a lot about workflow on your site, and you actually have a few courses on it. Tell us, what is workflow and why is it so important for producers to have a firm grasp of their workflow?
So I love the Wikipedia's definition for the word workflow, and that is how a piece of work passes from initiation to completion. So in the case of music production, it's how is a song started and finished.
Right.
And when people talk about workflow, when producers talk about workflow, they might be referring to how fast one works, how they deal with creative block, the sequence in which they do things and so forth. So it's not a narrow term. A lot of people talk about it in different ways.
Yeah.
But to me, it's how you start a song and take that through to completion? How do you come up with an idea? How do you take that idea, turn it into an arrangement? At which point do you mix it down? So forth. In terms of why it's important, I have 3 reasons. The first is it helps you work faster, which results in an increased output of musical work, songs, which in turn results in faster skill development and better music. There's a great argument to be made for quantity over quality.
Yeah.
Adam Grant in his book Originals talks about this, that creative people in history, the ones who did best, produced a large quantity of work that helped them learn very fast, and also it increases the chances of a piece of your work getting popular. The second reason it's important is it helps you overcome creative block and creative resistance. You know where you need to go next. You have the tools to help you solve problems. If you don't have a workflow, you can get to a certain point in a project and you're not sure where to go. You're just like, I don't know how to turn this into an arrangement. So that's an issue as well. And the third reason I think it's important is because it reduces frustration. You're not moving around a project blindly. You know where to go, what to work on, and when to work on it. You have a general idea of how to take melody or a chord progression or a drum sequence, turn it into arrangement, mix it down, and so forth. So you have a roadmap of sorts.
Right on. And, it's so important too, because, I at Audio Skills, I'll get emails from people who are stuck, quite frankly. They're frustrated with their music. They're like, I've got all these ideas and it just isn't coming out the way I want it to. And, it makes sense to me that so much of that can go back into, well, what's not only the order in which you're doing things, but, how are you generating your ideas and what's your process behind that? And are there things you can do to improve it? And so that kind of leads me to my next question, Sam, and that's if you could give one best tip or piece of advice for someone who wants to improve their workflow. They recognize that, how I'm doing this is I'm not finishing things the way I should. What would that be? What would your best piece of advice be?
My best tip would be to find the weakness, the core weakness, because with any producer, there's going to be something they're not good at, which is slowing them down in a project. For me, early on, it was writing melodies. Okay, I just sucked. I couldn't write good melodies. And so every time I would start a song, when I got to that point where I would have to write a melody, I would normally quit. And so one thing I did is I decided that I would start all my songs by writing a melody so that I couldn't avoid it. And the second thing I did was create a kind of a routine or a practice routine to get better at writing melodies. So I would say that find what your weakness is, find what's slowing you down the most, work on it, practice it, and then kind of put it back into your workflow, and it should make the songwriting process easier. And also try and separate the processes. This is another tip altogether, but when you start a new song and you're writing a melody or chord progression, just work on that. Don't worry about mixing. Don't worry about sound design. You can't and you shouldn't separate the processes completely, but you should at least try to, because what happens is you get distracted. And if you struggle with something like melody writing and you're good at sound design, naturally you'll follow the path of least resistance and you'll just come up with an average melody and so on. So I would say separate the processes and find your weaknesses, improve on them.
That makes a ton of sense. I think it's just a natural human instinct to, if something is particularly problematic for you, you shy away from it. And, that will make it even worse and worse and more challenging. And next thing you know, it's just become this huge roadblock. Whereas if you force yourself to, I guess, almost turn into it and just say, no, I'm going to face this right off the bat, it makes sense to me that can only help you kind of push through that and get better. I know with me, one of the things I still struggle with a bit in songwriting is I kind of have the exact opposite problem. I can come up with melodies and like simple chord progressions, but then I have trouble putting it together with, okay, I have this melody I really like, this chord progression I really like. Now, how do I put it all together, get my chorus, get my bridge, all that, and build the rest of it? It's like, that's the easy part for me. But then the hard part is the kind of grind it out kind of stuff,
Yeah.
So, bottom line, workflow is important. And, sometimes just kind of working at it and focusing on the weakest part, that's how you can do it. That's a great piece of advice. And kind of speaking to this, we're talking about improvement and getting better. I saw a really awesome quote the other day, and I shared it on the Audio Skills Facebook page, and it was, "Music is all about wanting to be better at it." And, I just love that because it's so true, right? And my question is, what's your best advice for someone who just wants to get better at music in general, or electronic music production specifically, as quickly as possible? Because, these days people, we're all pressed for time. We all want to get instant results. And of course, there's no substitute for just experience, but someone who wants to really level up as quickly as possible, how can they do that?
Two main things, and I'm going to preface this with a disclaimer. If you want to learn as quickly as possible, it is not going to be that enjoyable because it's going to be hard. So I like to take a scientific approach to all of this. There's a concept called deliberate practice. This was a guy called Anders Ericsson. Mm-hmm. He's a researcher. He's actually the leading researcher on expertise. So why are people successful? How do they become successful? And he kind of came up with this idea of deliberate practice, which is hard to define, but extremely directed practice on a specific thing, specific weakness. Now, when most people practice, they kind of do things that they know how to do or they're comfortable doing. Like if you play soccer, you're more inclined to do the stuff you know how to do because it feels good, you can show off, whatever. But deliberate practice would be doing that thing that you hate doing, that you really suck at, and doing it repeatedly for like an hour, 90 minutes straight. And that's just not enjoyable. But that is what makes you better. This is what Ericsson is saying. So when it comes to music production, if you want to learn as quickly as possible, what I would recommend is applying these deliberate practice concepts to music. And the way you'll do that is by remaking other tracks, because what that's going to do, professionally made songs,
sure,
pull them into Ableton or your whatever DAW you use and just try and remake them. What that's going to do is show you this huge gap between what you know and what this other person knows, the gap between your music and this other music. And you work and you work and you work and you try and get as close as possible. And while doing that, it's really not that fun. While doing that, you improve on all these skills. So I would say that, but most people listening to this, they're going to probably try that and they're going to quit doing it because it's really hard. The second thing I would say, which maybe is a bit slower but still effective, is what I mentioned earlier, which is focusing on quantity, not quality. And what I mean by that is not disregarding quality completely, but if you're a new artist, if you're a new producer, in fact, if you're new in any creative field, your focus should be quantity, because that is how you'll learn quickly, by going through a lot of different types of work. If you spend 3 months on your first song, that is a lot of lost opportunity compared to spending making 10 songs in 3 months. Even if the first 5 aren't going to be as good as that one song you made in 3 months. So I would focus on quantity over quality. You'll just learn a lot faster. And the quality actually comes from quantity, inevitably.
Absolutely. I took a creative writing course just for fun a couple years back. And one of the things the person who was teaching the course mentioned is the difference between someone who, wants to be an author and someone who is just kind of writing. And the difference is that someone who wants to be an author writes something and then it's like, oh, that's terrible. Well, it's a good start, or just finishes something and they're unhappy with it. And they're like, well, that wasn't my best, but maybe I'll write something else. So that idea that just kind of getting something down and then being able to look at it and say, okay, this wasn't everything I wanted it to be, but there were good parts, there were bad parts. There's something I think I can do better next time. And you are just constantly, that's how you learn, is by doing something. Last thing I'll say is there's this great Netflix documentary. Well, it's on Netflix, I think, but it's called Jiro Dreams of Sushi.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And there's this amazing part where I believe it's his son, and his son is trying to make this egg sushi. And there's like a specific process to make this egg. And he makes it, and every time he brings it to his dad, and his dad's like, not good enough, not good enough, not good enough. So he does it. And then he's like, finally, I brought it to him, and he said, now that is done well. that is perfect. And he's like, I almost wept and it was amazing. And, the idea is that he just grinded on it over and over. And yeah, it's not always fun, but the idea is that every completion is an opportunity to learn something and improve, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So kind of speaking to this, I think there's another idea out there. We were talking earlier about how some people feel like you either, you have an ear or you don't, and very few people are actually tone deaf. This thought that creativity is one of those things where people think, oh, well, I'm not a creative person. You are either creative or you are not. And in my experience, creativity is actually something that I believe can be fostered. Do you have any advice on how to, develop your creativity specifically for producers?
For sure. Everybody is creative. By everybody, I mean like sure, there are people out there who do have legitimate disorders and they can't be creative. But beyond that, like everyone listening to this is creative, and it's something that definitely can be developed. So the first thing is to understand that I'm just not creative, because as soon as you start thinking that, you're not going to be creative. It's kind of this vicious loop.
Right.
The biggest thing to understand is that creativity is a habit, and composers and artists in history understood this. They understood that you have to put in the work. You have to force yourself to sit down sometimes and just push through, and you can't wait around for inspiration. So if you think about the Sistine Chapel painting, I mean, what's his name?
Michelangelo?
Yeah. So as far as I know, he really didn't enjoy painting that. He said something like it was his worst, one of the worst times in his life, because he got paid to do it from the Catholic Church, and, it's not like he felt inspired to do it.
Right, yeah. It was a job, yeah, right.
And there's a great little analogy from, he was on the Tim Ferriss show, Neil Strauss, I think, New York Times bestseller.
Okay, yeah.
And he was saying, if you work for like the New York Times, the newspaper, and you're a writer, you don't go to work and you don't sit there, get to like 10 a.m. and you're like, I have writer's block today. I just can't do this.
Yeah,
you don't do that. You don't tell your boss, oh man, I have writer's block today. He's like, oh, I just go home.
You wouldn't be employed for a lot if you were
fired.
Yeah.
So the mere fact that people can and are paid to do creative work on a daily basis is saying something. So I would recommend reading a book called The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. Fantastic book. He talks about this idea of the resistance, which we all face when we sit down to do creative work. There are various reasons why that comes up. But I think the main thing to understand is that creativity is a habit. You got to put in the work every day. And sometimes you just have to force yourself to sit down and push through.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if it was Bob Dylan that said it or someone else, but they were talking about songwriting. Maybe it was Ben Folds. I can't remember. But the point is what was said is that, if I waited until I was inspired to write a song, I'd never get anything done. And often inspiration, that thing that just gets you so excited, that comes out of, sitting down and writing or producing or whatever it is that you're doing, daily and making that happen. So we were kind of talking about the New York Times and someone working there. A lot of people want to make a living creating music. And you have talked to many producers who are successful at doing just that. What tips or advice might you have or you've learned for folks who want to put food on the table, so to speak, with music making, with production?
A lot of people, when they answer this question, will give generic advice, and that's fine. They'll say things like work really hard and set goals. It's a tricky question. One thing I'm going to say, and this isn't to discourage anyone, but don't do anything stupid, especially if you have a family or people you're responsible for. I've received emails from guys who have a family and they're wondering whether they should quit their job, take up producing full time, even though they've been doing it for 6 months.
Oh, yeah.
Don't do that. Don't do that. It's irresponsible. It takes time and a lot of effort to build a career in this field. So I think being realistic about what it takes and just being smart is a good idea. And beyond that, think rationally and deeply about what you want your career to look like, and then develop systems to help you move towards that. My friend Joey, I actually had him on the podcast. He made it big. He was touring the world, and then he burned out. And he came back and he realized that he was never really suited to be a DJ, to be an artist that's playing shows all the time. It just wasn't his personality type. So you need to know that, because otherwise you can get 2 years into it and you find yourself in this position where you feel trapped. You've got managers, booking agents breathing down your neck, trying to make money from you. So be careful about that. Adjust along the way. There's a great resource called Principles from Ray Dalio. He's the manager of the largest hedge fund in the world. He talks all about how he thinks about success or achievement, how to set goals, create systems, overcome problems. I would recommend reading that. It's fantastic.
Right on, right on. Now, there's another thing that I think happens, especially when people are either just starting out or maybe they're just working on production or making music. They want to be famous. You know, they want that those accolades. They want to, they think they want to tour the world. And I would say it's not. Being famous isn't necessarily the best singular goal to have if you are going into music making. But that said, especially if you're trying to sell albums and get gigs and things like that, gaining a following is certainly important. So what advice would you have for someone who is like, okay, I want to gain a following. I want to grow my fan base or my brand or whatever it is. I want to attract people to what I'm doing, and, assuming that what you're doing has to, be reasonably good. But, what would be your advice there?
Yeah, if being famous is your singular goal, you're in for a rough ride.
Yeah, you're in the wrong line.
Yeah. I say this from not having experience standpoint. I've never been a big artist, but I have seen how people grow their fan base. I do have a background in marketing.
Sure.
I would adhere to the 1,000 True Fans model that was conceptualized by Kevin Kelly. The whole concept is that if you can acquire 1,000 true fans, you will be able to make a living off of music. A true fan is someone who buys all your music, who goes to all your shows, who buys your merchandise, who will support you on Patreon, whatever the case. And when you think about the 1,000 True Fans model, your marketing strategy is going to be different to if you were going to say, I just want to be the next Martin Garrix. I want to have 5 million followers, because you start to be more deliberate about your conversations or networking. You start to think about how you can add value. You respond to comments, all that kind of stuff. So I would start with that. A lot of people put the cart before the horse. And one thing to understand, and this is a little bit cynical, but no one really cares about your music. So how do you make them care? Like, you're not entitled to plays. You're not entitled to fans just because you put 20 hours into a song. You have to make the listener feel something. You have to inspire them. That's what people are after. People don't listen to music for the music. They listen to it for how it makes them feel, what it reminds them of. And so you have to think about that, I think.
No, that's really great advice. That makes a ton of sense. I think, too many people get jazzed up because they want to be the next, I don't know, Justin Bieber, Katy Perry, whoever, right? And it's like if you're focused only on that, you're kind of missing, all the steps that takes. And what happens is if you build kind of that core fan base, it makes sense to me that then you'll have people who will share your music, who will, sing your praises. Yeah. And then there's that element that exists is there's an element of luck, to and how you get that is just more opportunities. And then it's just that one person who hands your mixtape or your track or whatever it is to that one guy or gal, and then you get that sign or whatever, and then you're off to the races. And you don't get there by saying, well, I'm just going to keep focusing on that. You get there by saying, how do I foster my own following as best as I can?
One thing I'll add to that, Scott, is that a lot of people, there's no blueprint for success in this industry. There are certain things that will help and certain things that you should do and shouldn't do. But I think a lot of people fall victim to analyzing a Justin Bieber or Katy Perry, looking at their story and going, well, if I just do that, then I'll be successful. The issue with that is that these people never give all the information in interviews because they're not going to talk about like the bad stuff. And Nassim Taleb talks about this in, I think it's The Black Swan or something, but there's a narrative fallacy. We kind of revise history in our own brains so it makes more sense. Like, oh, this contributed to this. I'm only successful because I worked hard. I'm successful because of this. We make these links that may not even be causal. And in an interview, we'll kind of talk about those links. And so people get this skewed idea of what actually happened in that person's life for them to be successful.
That makes a ton of sense, because it's like if you're just focusing on the one aspect of, well, because we were talking Justin Bieber, is that, oh, you know, whatever, Usher found him on YouTube or whatever it was. And if you just are focused on that, it's like, dude, there were so many other things that were going on, and that wasn't quite so, you know, clear cut and packaged as that, you know, and so much of this is random and you know, that luck element. So yeah, that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, you have to focus on what you can control. You can't make Usher come across your music on YouTube and like sign you. You can't control that. You can control how much music you put out.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and you can control the skills you're developing and you know, how happy you are with your music now as opposed to a few months ago or whatever. Those are the things you can control. And, you know, if you want that, it's not bad to say, oh, I want a successful career and I want to tour the world and have millions of fans. That's not bad, of course, but it's easier to reach that almost if you're just focus on the things that you can control. And then if that's going to happen, it may happen, and it will happen if it's the right thing. It can happen. So, okay, moving it back to electronic music production, which, you know, is just so fascinating because of the power that, you know, something that you can make on a laptop, you know, the barrier to entry is so low. Where do you see electronic music production being in 5 or 10 years? You know, what developments or changes in technology, culture, or taste? And I know I'm asking you to kind of be a seer here, but where do you think it will go, and what do you think will shape it?
Yeah, ultimately I have no idea, but I do see a further merging of visual and audio, perhaps something happening in the virtual reality space.
Oh, yeah.
But overall, I can only see it growing, and the reason is because kids these days don't grow up. Like when I grew up, when I was 12, 13, I wanted to play guitar. Like, mum bought me a guitar, my brother and I got guitar lessons. That's what was cool, playing guitar. Nowadays, kids grow up wanting to be the next world touring DJ.
Right.
They want to learn to make electronic music. That's the new thing. So I think you've still got this younger generation coming through wanting to make electronic music. And I don't see it going away anytime soon, but it will definitely change. I don't know how. I honestly have no clue.
Yeah, for sure. It's certainly going to be interesting to see how it goes. And I think, you know, at Audio Skills, you know, one of my mantras is how technology just keeps making things, you know, the plugins and the software, it's better and better. And the things that you can do these days. And then when you kind of go way back in like the 60s and you see, it's like, well, there's one recording studio in your town and they've got like a ridiculous rig and that's where you have to go to make the music. And it's like, no, these days you can do so much and make a great song, you know, just all with the tools that you can download for not that much, you know. It's really incredible to see. And I can, like anything in technology, there's that, whatever that curve is, I'm sure that I can't remember the name of it, but you know, the idea that it's just getting better and better. So the gap between, I think, the pro realm and the amateur realm is just going to keep shrinking as technology enables so much more innovation. So this is a Scott question that I'm really interested as I love the podcast we're doing here and you know, the things you're doing over at EDM Prod are so great. You know, you've been able to chat with some awesome producers and you've made great connections with producers all over the world. And actually a lot of people want to make these kinds of connections in music and everything, you know, business and things like that. when it comes to that, what tips or advice would you have? Is it as simple as just sending an email out and reaching out and saying, hey, do you want to come on the show? Hey, we've got this going here, or is there something else to it?
I think a few things. It's not always as simple as that, but it definitely gets easier over time.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's something to be said about, there's two main approaches, and I kind of took the second one. The first one is networking before you actually have anything to offer, which I think is difficult. I'm talking about someone who is getting into music production and they're trying to network from the ground up. And you can do that, and it's not that one is better than the other. My approach when running EDM Prod, all I focused on for the first 6 months was writing articles. I didn't really do any networking. Yeah. And it was so much easier because people had come across these articles and they knew who I was.
Yeah.
And I think for me, that was a more efficient approach. With the podcast, one thing that helped a lot was leveraging other people's networks. I'm pretty slack with this, but after most shows, I would ask the person, hey, do you know anyone who would want to come on the show? Because getting a warm introduction is invaluable. These people would email their friends, say, hey, Sam's got this awesome podcast, just went on it, we had an awesome discussion, thought you might be interested. 90% of the time, land an interview from that. And we've had huge guests come on because of that. And then occasionally, I think there's something to be said about consistency and persistence.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've had like 2 guests on, and I asked this question, and they're like, sure, I'll intro you to a few people. And then they intro me to like 7 people who are just awesome guests. And it's like, it completely grows the podcast. Like, it's amazing. So using that, using other people's networks, asking for introductions, don't be scared to do it. The second thing is offering value up front. This is not a new concept.
Yeah.
A few weeks back, I had someone email me with a very short email. They just said, hey, Sam, hope you're doing well. Love the podcast. I've made an infographic of advice shared during your interview with Sebastian Lintz. Would you like to see it? I can send it over. I was like, yeah, sure, send it over. He sends it over. It's awesome, really well designed. He's just like bullet pointed all the stuff. Then he links to the episode at the bottom. And I'm like, dude, this is fantastic. And I replied to him, like, let me know if I can do anything. He just responds saying, yeah, no worries, man. Like, I'd love if you could put out more case studies on X and Y. And that was just cool. If he comes to me like tomorrow and asks for a favor, I'll do it for him.
Right. No, that makes total sense. I think so much of it is, making connections. You can't be afraid to just say, hey, what's up? Then you have to also leverage what you have. If you are out there and you're producing and if you've got some followers or if you're looking for gigs and get a good number of people to show up to your DJ gig or whatever it is, leverage that and say that, hey, I've got this. And then also, if you make friends with someone who owns a venue, say, hey, do you know anyone else who is looking for someone or whatever? I think that applies to so many things. It can apply to music, business, life, whatever. Just asking, there is no harm in that. And yeah, maybe someone will be like, I don't really know anyone, or they won't respond to you or whatever it is. But then the point is that's where the persistence comes in, is that's just like, keep asking, build your network, ask different people, whatever. That's how you do it, because I think so many people are also afraid. And I've dealt with this too, as I've started audio skills and stuff, is the idea that like, well, not everybody knows about me. So is this going to be great? No, not as many people know about audio skills yet, but how you build it is by just saying, no, here's what we've done. Here's who we are and what's up, let's
Sure.
work together, whatever it is.
Absolutely. Book recommendation, Never Eat Alone by Keith Ferrazzi. Really good book on networking. You've read it. Yeah.
Yep. I love that book. That was a book that was recommended to me when I had an internship at a pharmaceutical company, actually, back in college. And that was recommended to me by my boss, and great book. Definitely read that one. All right. So I'm going to close with just a fun question.
They've all been fun, man.
They have been. What's some of the stuff you've been listening to lately? Give me some new music recommendations. I love new music.
Oh, man. Really need to listen to more music. latest artist I've been hooked on is Jacob Collier. Have you heard of him?
Collier? Yeah.
On YouTube, man. He just does these awesome... You just got to look him up. Like, if you're listening to this, he is a musical genius, and I know everybody says that about everybody.
Sure.
He is. Like, he's literally a genius. There's an interview with him where he talks about music theory, and it went completely over my head. He was talking about, like, negative harmony. I don't even know what negative harmony is, but...
I don't.
Yeah, like, his music is insane.
That's awesome. Right on. Anybody else?
Honestly, like, not new artists.
Any classics?
I've been listening to a lot of 80s recently, actually. Don't ask why. It came up on Spotify.
Hey, you know what? It's funny. I was camping with my dad just this past weekend, and, I had this 80s mix, and I was playing it while we were making the fire and all that kind of stuff, and he was digging it. And, the 80s gets a lot of hate by some people. They're like, oh, 80s music, whatever. But I'm like, no, the 80s was great. And I think there's a lot of people that, maybe they're purists with instruments and stuff, but, some of the melodies and synths and the pop music and all that kind of stuff, that was great, and that's when, especially in the 80s, that's when synthesizers really were starting to really get super interesting. That's why with like Stranger Things, I don't know if you watched that show, you've probably heard of it.
I've heard of it, yeah.
Yeah, on Netflix. And one of the big things with Stranger Things is the soundtrack is very 80s inspired, and it's these guys, and they made it with just using synths, and they just have like a bajillion different kinds of synths. And you should definitely check out the Stranger Things soundtrack, or actually watch the show. But anyway, the point is that the 80s really produced some amazing, interesting things. And I think a lot of people are kind of calling back to that these days because it's so great. So yeah, being into the 80s, that's awesome. Sam, I just wanted to thank you so much for joining me. This has been really, really interesting, and I feel like I learned a lot, and I hope everyone listening did too as well.
Yeah, man, thanks for having me on. It's great to be interviewed for once.
For sure, be on the other side. I like it.
Yeah.
So if you would like to up your electronic music production game, or just learn more about these kinds of things we were talking about, like workflow and things like that, do go ahead and check out edmprod.com, and do listen to the EDM Prodcast as Sam interviews pros from all over the world who just share their knowledge and their expertise and their experiences. Thank you so much for listening today. And as a reminder, for links and information about today's show and our guest, please check out our show notes at audioskills.com/podcast. And no matter where you are, what your skill level is, what kind of music you're making, just go out there and give it your best and make great music that inspires you.
Ready to go even deeper with your recording, mixing, and music production? We've got all the info and techniques you need in one place so you can turn it up. Go to audioskills.com and access a huge library of video tutorials and private workshops so you make progress even faster. Come back next week for a brand new episode of the Audio Skills Podcast.